Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Your Author program from Facebook and YouTube. My name is Amanda Charles. I'm a young adult librarian in the Teenscape department of the Los Angeles Public Library's Central Library. And I'm here with my colleague, Leah Heller, and a young adult librarian from Teenscape as well. Before we move forward with today's program, we would like to pay our respects and acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as traditional caretakers of this land, because it is on this land that we are so lucky to work, teach, and learn as a community.
It is our pleasure to host the Your Author series today. We want to take a moment to thank our generous donors, the Lenore and Bernard Greenberg Fund and the Library Foundation, and our behind-the-scenes staff for helping the library bring these amazing author and illustrator programs to all of you. Before we get started, we just want to remind everyone to please feel free to share your thoughts, comments, and ask questions using the comments on Facebook and YouTube at any time. Also, please email ecdept@lapl.org, as you see on the screen, to be entered into an opportunity drawing to win Brandy Colbert's book, Blackbirds in the Sky.
Thanks, Leah. Now let's dive into our program. Brandy's work has been recognized by the American Library Association, Kirkus Reviews Vulture, Buzzfeed, 17 Magazine, and numerous other organizations and publications. Originally hailing from Springfield, Missouri, she resides in Los Angeles and is a faculty member at Hamline University's MFA program in writing for children.
Excuse me. Brandy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. We can't wait to learn and know more about you, your creative process, and your work bringing to life the book, Blackbirds in the Sky. To start us off, can you tell us a bit about your publishing journey?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I actually signed with a literary agent 10 years ago and sold my first book, I think it was 10 years ago in October. So I've been writing since I was a kid, though. And I always knew I wanted to be an author. And we used to make like these little books in school and sort of enter them in contests, or sometimes it was just for our own enjoyment. And I look at the bios in the back of those books that I still have, and it says, I want to be an author when I grow up. But I kind of never thought it would happen. So it's really cool that it did happen. I've been writing my whole life, but really started writing for publication in my early 20s. I didn't know any other writers. I had no idea how to get published. So I looked up everything online. That was still sort of the time when you had to send manuscripts to literary agents in the mail. And so for anyone who doesn't know, a literary agent is the person who connects you with an editor. And then, of course, the editor is the person who edits your work at the publishing house and then helps get your work out to a broader audience. So I wrote 4 books before I was able to sign with a literary agent. And that 4th book was my first book, Point. So that came out in, it sold in October 2011, and then it came out in April 2014. And so I think Blackbirds in the Sky is my 7th book, I think. So all of this just feels like a dream, but I'm really, really excited to be able to be here talking about the books that I wrote.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Moving on to your new book, Blackbirds in the Sky, it tells the history of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Not just the events of the day, but the awful weeks and months that followed, but also the circumstances and factors leading up to the acts of white supremacist mob terrorism, violence, and mass murder. Can you tell our audience a little bit about why it was so important to write this history for young readers, and then read a passage from the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to show the book, first of all, because it's really beautiful. I had nothing to do with the cover, but it's still quite beautiful. It was really important to me to write this because I feel like I grew up not learning a lot about history at all, or, what I learned was really quite sanitized. I didn't feel like I ever got the real story behind anything or any real context. So once I started, probably in my mid-20s, I really started becoming interested in history and, realized that a lot of the things that I had learned as a kid didn't make sense because no one had ever really explained why. It was more like learning a bunch of dates, memorizing them, memorizing the names of wars, or just a bunch of people we really didn't know. And so I thought, well, I never thought I would write a history book, first of all. But once I decided I was going to, I thought, well, I want to do it different. Like, I want to make sure that when you finish my book, like, you understand why everything happened, and that really no history is in a bubble, and that the things that happened hundreds of years ago are still affecting us today, especially in the United States. So I am going to just read a little bit from the forward. So the forward is just something I wanted to write to sort of explain why I wanted to, write this book, and sort of my connection to the material. I'm not going to read all of it, but I will just read a little bit to give you a taste of it. By the time I'd reached 4th grade, the lesson I dreaded most was our history unit on slavery. I attended a predominantly white school in a predominantly white Missouri town, and more often than not, I felt like I fit in well enough. Some people went out of their way to point out my differences, like my highly textured hair that would curl and thicken at the scalp when my chemical relaxer started to grow out. Or they would hold their hands up to mine when they'd gotten a particularly good tan, showing me that they were almost as dark as me. There were other microaggressions, of course, way too many to name here. It was Southwest Missouri, and it was the 1980s. Racial sensitivity wasn't high on most people's list of priorities. History class felt uninspired and repetitive for much of the year, but the few days we spent learning about Black Americans were excruciating. I was embarrassed when our teachers talked about the African people who had been stolen from their continent and brought to the United States to be part of a chattel slavery system. I didn't like the way both the teachers and the textbooks talked about enslaved people as if they weren't actual human beings with hopes and dreams and emotions and profound mental strength. I also didn't like that heads automatically swiveled to find me to see how I was reacting to the lesson because I was one of the only Black people they had ever met in their entire lives. And in retrospect, I hated that the room was uncomfortably silent during the lesson, that nobody asked why we never learned about anyone apart from basic biographies of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, that no actual countries in Africa were ever named, which is likely why so many Americans still think Africa is a country rather than a continent, and that the lesson never explicitly stated how much the violent genocidal foundation of this country shaped everything about how our nation operates today. Perhaps the most insulting part about the units covering centuries of Black history is that they were so brief. We spent maybe a week on the topic, if that. Reconstruction was never explained in a meaningful way. The civil rights lesson was, again, focused on sanitized versions of two people, Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I never came across the names of voting rights activists Fannie Lou Hamer or Stokely Carmichael or John Lewis in our textbooks. And I can't remember one mention of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress, as well as the first woman and Black woman to run for a major political party's nomination for President of the United States. The fact that there was no separate detailed lesson about the Trail of Tears, which ran right through our hometown, was particularly egregious. I blame the history texts more than my individual teachers. For the most part, I know the curriculum was not up to them. And I know that some of them, all white women and men, were inherently uncomfortable teaching lessons about such traumatic times in our country's history. But all these years later, after meeting so many dedicated, progressive, and passionate educators around the country, I have to wonder, why didn't just one of my teachers care enough to go off script, to sit in their discomfort so we could have honest conversations about our past, to not only challenge us to learn more, but to challenge themselves as well?
Thank you so much. So powerful. The photos and the quotes that you start every chapter with are amazing and powerful. And how did you decide which ones to use? And you already mentioned that you didn't have anything to do with the book cover, but it's so mesmerizing and beautiful. Like, do you know how they came upon it? Did you have veto power?
Yeah, so the quotes, for anyone who hasn't read it yet, beginning of each chapter, I wanted to start each of those with quotes from survivors. There's a really helpful website from the John Franklin Hope Reconciliation Center in Tulsa. And so they had this page, and I just remember reading this and just like sobbing and just seeing these pictures of these survivors at the time who were probably in their 80s and 90s. At the time, I don't think any of them are still around. And just like sobbing and just like saying how powerful this is, and how, for so many, decades, we did not get to hear their stories. So it was really important to me to try to give those survivors a voice, even if it is 100 years later. And I really wanted to try to match some of the quotes with the material that I was covering in each chapter. So that's sort of how I decided there, but it was difficult to pare it down, and I wanted to include all of the ones that I found, definitely. The photos were kind of the same thing, honestly, most of the photos, it was, 1921. So it's like, they weren't great quality photos. Some of them were like from postcards that they made as like, commemoration of the event. So a lot of it is just like buildings on fire, just the wreckage of homes and stuff. But I really wanted to put that in there so people can see, like, this is what it actually looked like this happened, and this is real, and these are real people's real homes and real livelihoods that were destroyed. And then as for the cover, I'm not, I know what I like and what I don't like, but I'm not like a conceptually like visual person. So I would never give any input on covers, because there's like really, departments of great people who do that. But HarperCollins kills it, all the time. I've loved so many, this is my first book with them, but I've loved like so many of their covers. And so I was excited to see what they would come up with. They hired a collage artist, named Natasha Cunningham. And so I had seen some of her work before, just kind of randomly. And I was like, oh, I love it, because she uses a lot of bright colors and just juxtaposed with sort of these like maybe more somber, more serious black and white images. So once they said that they were considering her, I was like, yeah, I'm really excited, because like I said earlier, I wanted to write a history book that didn't feel kind of like your standard history book, that was really more involved. And I didn't want a book that looked like a history book. I didn't want something that had kind of just like drab colors and like boring where no one would pick it up. So, and I'm a person who loves, real bright colors and all of that. So when they just kind of showed me, they showed me her work before, and then that was it. And then they were like, okay, we'll just have a concept for you later. And I was absolutely blown away. I had no notes, except just like, you guys did an amazing job. And the in-house designer at HarperCollins was Karina Lupp, who commissioned Natasha. So,
oh, wonderful! Thank you.
It is such a beautiful cover. One of the things that I really appreciated about the foreword that you also just read from, to Blackbirds in the Sky, was the way that you tied your experience growing up as one of very few Black people in Springfield, Missouri, to Tulsa. Both towns were the site of horrific acts of racist violence that were later covered up by the town's white communities. But those events caused a large part of the town's Black population to move. The lesson I took from that was that the makeup of our towns and neighborhoods is not an accident, that we're not here by accident. And as an example, like even places that did not institute Jim Crow segregation, like Los Angeles, were often shaped by domestic terrorists like the KKK, racially restrictive covenants, redlining, racially motivated use of eminent domain. And I was wondering, what are some ways that young people can look at their city or neighborhood the way that you did and interrogate the effect that white supremacy had in shaping it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think if you just kind of look around at the makeup of your town, and, I guess it could be anywhere. Like LA is a more, you diverse city, of course, but it still kind of has its factions, right? Like there's certain areas that are more primarily Black or more primarily Latinx, and then, pretty much all white neighborhoods. But I'm thinking of specifically like a town that I grew up in, it's just kind of like, oh, there's just not really any Black people here or any other, people of color. And no one ever questioned it. And it's just like, why? So yeah, I would love for anyone who's, a younger person or even my age or older, to really think about like the racial makeup of your town and say, well, why did this happen? And like some of the things Amanda mentioned, like you might start seeing like, oh, they cut a freeway right through the Black neighborhood that used to be here, and now it's no more, which happens all the time, happened in Tulsa to the Greenwood district. That happens a lot. And yeah, I think just be aware of the history of your town and why things are the way they are. And you will start seeing those kinds of things that were put into effect that really made it what it is and formed, or helped shape like the way, school districts are set up and just all kinds of things. But yeah, I think just looking into, the history of your city, like this information is out there. You might have to go to the library and look in a reference book that you can't check out or something like that, or go look at something on microfilm. But there's so much on the internet even still that you can just look and it's really right there to see. And I just really always encourage people to start talking about these things, start telling your friends about it, start talking to your family about it, because the more people talk, like the more we cannot ignore these things and hopefully can prevent them from to keep continuing in the future.
Thank you. Is there a specific target audience that you think of while writing? And we know you've written like young adult, middle grade, and now nonfiction. How did you already talked a little bit about it, but how did you decide to delve into nonfiction after primarily writing fiction?
Yeah, so I kind of always have like my younger self in mind when I'm writing, just because, you know, especially with the fiction that I wrote, like I never saw, you know, really young Black girls in fiction, or if I did, it was even usually during slavery times or, you know, the civil rights movement, just sort of like, again, like I read from the book, like these kind of big moments in Black history rather than just like everyday Black kids living their life, which is who I was and what I wanted to read about. So I feel like I'm always kind of trying to satisfy that younger part of myself, and just give myself those portrayals that I never really got to see. And then, yeah, I love fiction. I love it so much, but I've started reading more nonfiction in the last maybe 10 to 15 years. Primarily adult, but I've read a couple of also, you know, or a few YA nonfictions as well, and was really impressed by what was out there, but also surprised that there wasn't more. And so when I was thinking about this, you know, I had only heard about the Tulsa Race Massacre maybe like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago or something like that, like pretty recently in the grand scheme of things. And then when I was watching HBO's Watchmen that came out a couple of years ago, you know, that's when a lot of people learned about it for the first time, and it sort of like reignited my interest in it. And so I was looking things up and, you know, realized there wasn't really anything for young readers on this topic in nonfiction form. And so I thought, well, you know, I guess I could do that. You know, the first thought if you've written fiction is to always sort of just keep sticking with what you've already done. But I did study journalism. I have a journalism degree, and I've worked in journalism, more like, you know, the entertainment side rather than the hard hitting news side. But I have worked in it pretty much my entire adult life. So I thought, well, you know, I could try to write this book. And so I started working on a proposal, and it was very scary. And honestly, it was very scary the whole way through. You know, I want to be as factually accurate as I can. There's not always a way to include all the information you want. You know, you have to pare things down and try to figure out how to sort of like compact it. So it was a big undertaking, but I was really glad. I always want to keep challenging myself. So that was another thing. It was like, you know, nonfiction was a new challenge. It was something I hadn't done yet. And then to also do it for young readers was just really cool. And I'm so glad I got the opportunity to do it.
We are so glad you did it. I'm so happy to have this book on our shelves. So the story of what happened to Black Wall Street, Tulsa's Greenwood district, it's horrific and it's heartbreaking. Living with the event and all of the injustice leading up to it for months while writing this book must have taken an emotional toll, especially during a pandemic. How did you care for yourself while writing this difficult but necessary history?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It was, I think, like 2020, all of us will look back in a few years and just be like, how did we get through that? You know, it was tough. You know, I was alone most of the time. I live alone, so that was difficult, you know, in itself, sort of the isolation of it all. And then, yeah, working on this while also there's, you know, at the time, I think somewhat of a reckoning with race, you know, the protests around George Floyd, the whole thing in Central Park that happened with Christian Cooper and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, you know, it's just like thinking of all those things that were happening at the time. And I remember wondering, like, you know, is it ever going to stop, sort of? But it almost, I don't know, it almost like invigorated me in a way, because it helped me see these parallels between everything that had happened in the past that I was researching from, you know, over 100 years ago up to now. And so it felt like, wow, like I really, really need to get the truth out there. But as for how I like took care of myself, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a big like reality TV fan. Like Bravo is like my channel. So, you know, I was just like basically like injecting Real Housewives into my bloodstream the whole time. I got really into yoga and just like kind of home workouts like Pilates and, like weights and stuff like that. What else? Got really into cooking. And yeah, I think those are kind of like, and of course, reading always, but those are kind of my outlets that always help me feel sort of like creatively inspired and able to sort of get away from the tough material that I was working on.
Yeah, you definitely need breaks, and your book fills such a void. And with the excellent research that you did for Blackbirds in the Sky, did you come across any other moments that are forgotten or denied that you like earmarked to write about next?
Oh, there was so much I was intrigued by, I was just like taking notes on everything. I think it was so fascinating to me to sort of go back that far in time and because it's not like the 1920s aren't something that I was really, well read in and hadn't gotten a lot of information about till then. So I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of things I want to write about. I don't want to say anything yet because I am kind of thinking of some things, but I was definitely inspired, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to see more of what I'm going to work on in the future soon. Sorry for the dodgy answer, but
No, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Whatever you're writing, we're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Let's see. So yeah, there's a lot in the news right now about challenges to young adult books in school libraries. For those of you in our audience who are not familiar with library lingo, per the American Library Association, a challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials based on objections of a person or group. And Brandi, in fact, your 2018 Stonewall Award-winning novel, Little and Lion,
look at you.
Is on a conservative Texas state lawmaker's list of 850 young adult books that he believes might, quote, make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or sex. What is your response to this and other challenges to your work?
Yeah, I saw that. And then I saw yesterday someone told me that my middle grade novel, The Only Black Girls in Town, is attempting to be challenged in some other smaller town in Texas. I think it's disgusting, especially, when it's the dominant group whose perspectives and art and everything has always been available, always been widely read, widely supported, never been challenged. I think it's really disgusting when now that other voices are actually getting the chance to be seen and heard, that suddenly that's a problem and that we have to go back to, only this one group getting their views, out there. I don't see how recognizing one group's existence is threatening another group's. And to me, that's all it's about. And I find it disgusting and abhorrent and, insert any word there. I think it's really upsetting. And I think, as authors, it feels like we're somewhat powerless in this, we're not. But for me, I guess the only thing I want to do is just to keep writing, the same types of books that I've been writing, supporting the types of books that are on those lists, encouraging people to, support those books as well, buy them, check them out from your library, help get them into the hands of the kids who are in these places where they're attempting to be banned, and also to, vote in these local elections, vote in these school board elections. It all starts, locally and then expands from there. And so, yeah, it's really hard. It's really difficult. I think anyone who's paying attention kind of anticipated maybe the book banning phase, but it's really kind of wild to be in it and to see the books and authors that they are attacking just for existing. So
yeah, it's getting more and more prevalent. And then it ends up that the school librarians kind of help the kids get to the public library because we often are the ones that have it. So they get even more read, right? Or are they're also contesting public libraries?
I think it's mostly school libraries, but I do have to say that the fact that somebody out there is challenging a book or banning a book, I mean, I saw Little and Lion on the list and I picked it up and I started reading it the same day. And I know I now have like the #1 best line to sell this book to teens, which is somebody out there does not want you to read this book. Here you go.
Right. And I have to say, I'm so appreciative always of librarians. I mean, libraries have been so super special to me since I was a little kid, before I even like could say the word library. I was going to the library. And I just really appreciate everything you're doing, and that you are getting books into the hands of kids who need them. But another thing I wanted to say was that, I don't know, when I was a kid, like, I was a kid who at 14 was like reading Danielle Steele, like those thick, juicy romance novels. But like, if I picked up something that I was uncomfortable with, I knew to just put it down. And a book is like the safest place where you can explore something, right? It's a story. You can put it down when you want to. It's not actually happening to you. And in the case of a novel, it's fictional. It's not even real. So the fact that that could be a threat to anybody is really just shocking to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and back when I was a teen, there were no teen books. So now there's so many great teen books. But to follow up to the above question, do you get to hear from your readers much? I know you're on social media a bit, but do you get like emails or comments, and how do they contact you?
Yeah, I kind of a little bit reclusive online, so I don't really have like a good way to reach out. But I just got a DM the other day on Instagram from a young reader in Tulsa that just like brought me to tears, because she said, I finally got my, and she had an Instagram story where she had the photo of the book and a caption that said, I finally got my librarian to order this for our school. And then she DM'd me and said, hi, I just wanted to let you know that, I live in Tulsa, and your book is really great and tells us so much more about Black Wall Street and the Greenwood District, and, things around that we are actually, the area that we are actually living in. And it's helping me and my fellow students and friends, learn about this. And, I just really wanted to thank you. And I was like, oh, like, this is why I do it. It's really incredible to hear from these readers. So I will get, even though I kind of don't really have a good way to contact me, I do get, comments and tweets and DMs sometimes that just are really amazing, and they really mean a lot. I don't even know, when I was a teen, again, I'm like Lear, like there weren't really like there wasn't like a dedicated like teen section really. It was mostly just children's fiction with a couple of like maybe books for teenagers. But I don't think I would have even thought to write to an author then. So just the fact that, because you don't know the impact that your books are having unless someone tells you. So the fact that teens ever even reach out, every time I get one of those messages, it just means so much to me.
Thank you.
So Blackbirds in the Sky does a really great job of explaining the past in a way that present day young people will understand. I really like the way that you compared newspapers to modern day social media, in that there are some newspapers that are more responsible and some that are less responsible. And do you have any lessons that you've learned on in writing this book about illuminating the past for a modern audience?
Yeah, it was so fascinating to me to like look back and see like the Tulsa Tribune was this paper that, I mean, the blame is laid on many people for the fact that the Tulsa Race Massacre happened, but the Tulsa Tribune definitely fanned the flames. And, I have a whole chapter about like, the history of media and newspapers and Black newspapers, and how white newspapers would report on Black people at the time, and all of that. And it was just super fascinating to see, again, like not that much has changed. And so, there were some newspapers at the time that were super sensational, and they would just flat out report like, fake news. I mean, sorry to say it, but they would. And it's just like the same where you look at certain accounts, today, and it's like, okay, well, you can't trust anything that comes from there. Like, what's your source? And, you look at the source and it's not reputable. So yeah, I think for me, it was just really, even if I knew that sort of on the surface, it was really fascinating to go back and have examples of the fact that like all of these things in the past contributed to where we are today. And that, there's so many people who you could take from today and put back in those times, and exactly what role they would play. So, I already know like the journalists or, the political commentators or whatever, who they would have been back in the day. It was really kind of fascinating to look at that and compare that and just see that, times change and, technology has changed a lot of stuff, but at the core, it's still exactly what it was back then.
Thank you. Yes. So switching to the youth again, are there any words of wisdom you can offer young creative minds starting out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just go for it. When I was younger and I was writing, there were like a couple of friends that I told, but I was so scared to tell anybody that I was a writer because I was worried that what I was writing was terrible, or that, also at that time I didn't really know of many Black authors. Of course, they were out there, but I didn't know of them and I didn't know where to really look for them. No one was guiding me to that. So I would say just be proud of your writing. Maybe don't be afraid to show it to people, or at least find one or two trusted friends, or a parent or family member or something that you can show your writing to, and try to find someone who's supportive of you and who tells you like, hey, keep going, keep doing this. I would say read. If you're a writer, read as much as you can get your hands on, and try to read outside of your comfort zone. So, if you're a big fantasy reader or writer, try reading contemporary realistic or historical fiction, or something else. And, vice versa. I have to remind myself of that because I definitely have, the types of books that I like to read. But I try to get myself out of that, just reading the same thing over and over again, because you will grow as a writer. If you let in all different kinds of writing into your life. Also, I would say just like try to find inspiration in anything. A lot of questions you get as a writer is like, where do you get your ideas? Where does your inspiration come from? And I say like everywhere, like, not even other books necessarily, like TV, movies. Like I could overhear a conversation, at Walgreens or something, like anything. Just like let yourself be open to taking in just the world basically, and you will find that like so many ideas, like I think I have so many more ideas than I will ever actually be able to write. And that's a really good place to be in, I think.
Thank you. One more question before we start with our audience questions. And I think you kind of answered this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to ask you officially, for those of us who are dying to know, what can you tell us about your next project?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm in it right now. I'm revising my next book. I think it was supposed to come out next year. Now it won't be out next year, but it should be out 2023. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Its working title is The Blackbirds. It's this real big, ambitious book about a Black Hollywood family. And it's sort of like my middle grade, the only Black girls in town, and that it's going sort of back and forth between sort of these historical sections and present day sections. And kind of the three main narrators are these teenage cousins who live in LA, and they're all connected to Hollywood in some way. And then their great grandmother has recently died, and she was sort of like the matriarch of the family and held everybody together. And she had this whole career in Hollywood, sort of like she would be a contemporary of like Dorothy Dandridge or like Lena Horne, sort of that group of Black actors. So right now I'm just sort of like, what did I get myself into? Because I'm still, in the thick of working on it, and it's very hard, but I'm really, really excited about it. So that'll be the next thing you see from me.
That sounds awesome.
Amazing.
That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
It's for YA, or is it middle?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's YA. And then I actually have also another middle grade coming out, maybe also 2023. I'm not sure. I'm just going to write the books and they will tell me when they come out. But and that's like a loosely based sort of retelling of The Parent Trap, which is one of my favorite stories of all time. But I am hardcore Haley Mills original 1960s Parent Trap. I will hear nothing of the Lindsay Lohan 1990s version. I appreciate what she did there, but I'm Haley Mills for life. So
that's awesome. Thank you. So we look forward to both of those so much. Now we will open the floor for audience questions. So let's see what we have. Seth OJ12 says, "What did you think of Watchmen?"
Oh, awesome. I don't think I've gotten this question yet. Thank you. I loved Watchmen. And the thing is like, I'm not the target audience. Like I really respect like comic book culture and, the stories and all of that, but I had no idea what Watchmen even was. I just knew that Regina King was in it and it was coming on HBO, and that's basically all you need to get me into a show. I loved it. I thought it was brilliantly done. I would love to go back and watch it again. I mean, I know they said we're not getting another season, but I also kind of want another season. But yeah, I thought it was brilliant. And for someone who is not immersed in that culture at all, I think they did an amazing job.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you.
So one from Kevin, are there any other books that you would recommend dealing with the Tulsa Race Massacre?
Yeah, so, I kind of read bits of books while I was working on this to help me out. So I don't necessarily have the titles in my head, but I would say anything by Scott Ellsworth, who I think, is one of the people who wrote like kind of the first modern account of it. Mary Elizabeth Jones Parrish wrote the first book on it in 1922. She was a Black woman who survived the massacre with her young daughter, Florence Mary. And so she wrote it in 1922. It was just re-released this year. Again, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with titles. But if you look for Mary Elizabeth Jones Parrish, you should be able to find that. I think a university press published it, I want to say. There is a novel, which is really cool, called The Angel of Greenwood. I think I did get that right? Okay, by Randy Pink. That's a YA novel. I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it. I heard it's really beautiful. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I would recommend dealing with the massacre for sure. But I know there's like so much stuff that has come out that I've probably also missed this year. So, which is a great problem to have.
I had not ever heard of the Mary Elizabeth Jones Parrish, that book that came out. I think that one of the things that is so great about this book is like the depth of information that it provides, like the information on the background of like the Trail of Tears, that there were enslaved people on the Trail of Tears. Like Lear and I have been having conversations about this book all week. Like, did you know this? I didn't know that. I didn't know this. And when you go through and you list the books that have previously been written, I think you mentioned the book from 1922. You mentioned a book in the 70s. Like again and again, it seems like history is like, we're trying to get this story out there, and it takes like critical mass or maybe some big HBO money to like get that story, widespread. But it was so just really great to read, to get that depth of how this story has been told, and you do that in your book. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I felt sad because I too learned from Watchmen. And then I was like, wait, what? And so I looked it up and did some research, and not in high school, not in college. I had not heard of it.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, just even people in Tulsa have like, from the moment my book deal was announced, people were like tweeting me being like, I grew up in Tulsa and I hadn't heard of it until like a year ago. I'm like, this is, I mean, so no one should feel bad, I don't think, for knowing about it, because even people who grew up in the town, it's just the information was not being taught, sadly, widely anyway. I know some people definitely were teaching it, but yeah.
My high school history book listed it as the Tulsa Race Riot, and they said that about 20 people had been killed, and it was kind of a both sides sort of telling, which it definitely was not. Just a spoiler for everybody out there, it was not. And that's, I think, why this book is so important, because it's really using the history and the documents that are available and the survivors' words to tell the real story for what was covered up for so long. Lear, you want to do the next question?
Yes, and I'm going to try not to get this name wrong. Amanda Johnston asks, despite seeking information on racial topics since middle school, I didn't know about Black Wall Street until I read Ta-Nehisi Coates in my mid-20s. Where do you seek out hidden or suppressed information? Great question.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'm like super proud of anyone who's been actually seeking out this information, because I feel like so many people, that I know would rather just kind of turn away from it because it is uncomfortable and it's just kind of easier to stick your head in the sand, right? Yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I feel like, has really kind of brought a new sort of renewed interest in nonfiction, I would say, and especially, nonfiction about Black history and just the Black community, Black culture in general. Yeah, I guess for me, I find it from a variety of areas, but you do have to go seek it out. So, I think a lot of his stuff, Coates' stuff, was published in The Atlantic. So, magazines like The Atlantic and The New Yorker will usually do kind of long form articles about things like this. I'm trying to think of everything I was like found in my research, so many books. But again, a lot of these are sort of kind of like the stodgy looking thick, history books for adults that may not look as appealing. I think we are doing a better job of getting nonfiction for young readers, but we're not where we should be at all. Documentaries I think are really great. I couldn't tell, I'm a huge TV fan. So I always recommend television. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was like, you weren't supposed to watch TV and it was rotting your brain, but TV has gotten better on every front since the 80s. And so there's a lot of really good documentaries. PBS always has really great documentaries. I feel like there's always like a Ken Burns, like 10-part, documentary that you can watch on PBS. Probably like the networks like ABC, NBC, CBS, I think, and Nat Geo. Like I think all of those, the main networks, and then some of the cable channels did sort of documentaries around the massacre. I didn't watch because I had been immersed in this for like a year and a half, and I just had to take a break when all of that stuff came out earlier this year. But yeah, I would say just trying a variety of formats and media is always usually pretty helpful, but it is kind of disappointing that you have to sort of cobble it together. One other thing I would say is like, if you look at the back of a book that you like if you look at the back of my book, there is, a bibliography. And so you can, or source notes. And so you can see where I got some of this information. So maybe if you pick up a book, and maybe it's not really working for you in the tone or the style or whatever, but you can always look in the back and see where this author sourced their information, because that might actually help you find stuff that's maybe more tailored to what you're looking for.
Thanks. So let's see. Steve asks, what were some of your literary influences or some writers people should check out?
Oh gosh, so many. I like, people often ask like kind of what was the first book you saw yourself in, and I think like it was kind of it was Toni Morrison's Sula. Not necessarily that I related to the story, but it was just like seeing Black women getting to be real people and, make mistakes and kind of have messy lives. So Toni Morrison was like one of the first, Black women authors that I actually read and was really inspired by. Toni Morrison's always the answer. James Baldwin, of course, always. Colson Whitehead, I would read his grocery list. He's amazing. I just think I love what he's doing, that he does something kind of new every time. And the fact that he won 2 Pulitzers back to back, I don't think I'll ever get over it. And each of them is such a beautiful, amazing book. I'm looking at my shelves now to kind of cheat and see what's over there, because I always kind of forget. As for YA, I really loved the book The Black Kids by Christina Hammonds Reed that came out last year. It was, I guess it's historical fiction because it's set during the LA uprising of 1992. So I'm like, yeah, that's historical fiction now. That book was really, really great. And I think really interesting because it told the story of a Black girl living during the uprising, but she grew up in a wealthy family and wealthy neighborhood. And so you're kind of seeing her vision of it versus someone that was growing up where the uprising was taking place. So I think that was really fascinating. I love Ilana K. Arnold's novels. I think are so great. She's always writing something kind of new and interesting and different. She writes across all age groups, from picture books up to YA, which is really great. Nina LaCour is also one of my favorite authors. Just really spare, beautiful writing. So yeah, I would say those are some of the people that I sort of look to when I would just want to read really good writing, or when I want to be really inspired as well.
Thank you. Kevin has a great question, and no, we didn't. Sorry if you already covered this, but can you talk a little bit about your writing process? How many hours a day? How many days a week do you write?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, my writing process is like, I always kind of try not to talk about it because I don't want anyone to sort of think this is the average life of a writer. But yeah, I'm kind of I don't really have a process. And maybe that is the average life of a writer, is that like no 2 processes are the same. I don't outline. So this Tulsa book, The Blackbirds in the Sky, is the first book I've ever outlined and kind of stuck, to the outline because I had to, because it's nonfiction. So that was interesting to see like a new way of doing things. But with my fiction, I do not outline. I will say as I start going through the book, I will sort of like write notes at the bottom of the document. So like when I come back, I know next time, okay, that's what I need to cover. Like I haven't done this yet. So I don't write every day. I would have no idea how to tell you how many hours I write a week, but I would say like right now I am writing every day because I'm on a really tight deadline for revision. So I would say anywhere from 3 to 4 hours probably a day. Yeah, but it's just kind of like loosey goosey for me. It was kind of weird. I wrote 2 books this year. I was, kind of writing and / revising the Tulsa book at the top of the year. And then that came out at the end of the year. And then I wrote the first draft of the Blackwoods in the middle of that. And then I took like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months off, which I've never really done before, but I think I needed it just, coming out of 2020, working on such an intense book as this nonfiction, and then having to turn around and write another book was a lot. So I took time off. That wasn't normal for me. I kind of worried, and I think I worry about this no matter how long it's been, how short or long a time it's been, that I forgot how to write. So, even someone who's written as many books as I have, published as many books as I have, like, it doesn't always come easy. And sometimes I just kind of have to like force myself into it, when I'm not feeling it. I will just have to open up the computer and just sort of like fake it, just start typing, to get myself into it. So I'm not a very regimented writer, but I do really admire like my friends who have, sometimes you'll see authors share their process and they have just like a bulletin board of like Post-it notes and like just like all these processes. That doesn't work for me. It's just more about just kind of just sitting with the work. But yeah, so I don't know. Sorry, that was kind of a mess of an answer, but that's how I feel like my process is. So
Well, that was great. Thank you.
And so one from Teetle57. It was mentioned that there are challenges to a few of your books, but assuming those are instigated by adults, can you talk about the response you get from teens to your challenged books?
Yeah, I haven't in that context, I haven't like gotten any responses yet, but I think teens just want to be able to read what they can. And so the blowback never comes from kids or teens, as far as I can tell. I've never heard of that. You sometimes hear the parents say like, well, my teen came to me or my kid came to me and they said that the book contained this, and then they had questions, but it's never that they were upset. It's just that they had questions. Right. And so then sometimes these adults feel uncomfortable having to talk to their kids about these things. But my answer to that is always like, well, you're uncomfortable talking about it, but these are people's real lives. There's nothing shameful about the existence of these people whose lives are being portrayed in these books. So yeah, I think it's really just more of an adult thing. And if anything, the kids just have questions about it and they just want to know more. Maybe that wasn't contained in the book, and so my answer to that then would be like, so give them more material to read, so they can have these questions. If you don't have the answer, give them something to read, or have them talk to somebody who does have the answer. The answer isn't to just take the book away and try to stop anyone else's kid from reading it.
What a great learning opportunity for parent and child.
Exactly.
I lost track of whose turn it was, Amanda.
It's yours.
Sorry, I was really into that answer. Sorry.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you for your question. When not writing, are you reading heavily? I heard many writers do this. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. I counted the other night, there's like 8 books on my nightstand. It's actually like a little bit ridiculous. I never used to be a person who was like, I read more than, I was always like, I read a book, I finish it, and I start another. And now it's just like, I'm always reading like 4 different books. Sometimes I'm reading books to blurb for other authors, when you see like that, this book was wonderful, Brandy Colbert, like on a cover, it's a blurb. So a lot of my reading time is actually spent blurbing. But yeah, I'm reading all the time. And I guess because I do have that mix of books, it's always like, there will be usually an adult fiction, an adult nonfiction, and, a YA fiction in a middle grade. It's kind of like always that sort of mix. But yeah, I'm always reading. Because for me, if I'm not reading, then I don't want to be writing typically. So that always kind of gets me in the mood to write, especially if you're reading something super inspiring and well written.
Wonderful.
I had a question. I really love how you draw parallels in the book between the 1920s and today. And like you talked about like Ida B. Wells, Barnett, and I was like Nicole Hannah Jones. And then you talked about Shirley Chisholm. Like you're just like going through history. You talk about Shirley Chisholm, and I'm like Stacey Abrams. Like it's just like you invite the reader to make these comparisons, and then you make these comparisons. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ways that you see history repeating itself, or the parallels that you see between now and then. Um, uh, Maybe things that are hopeful that are maybe coming back in addition to the not so hopeful stuff.
Yeah. Oh, let me think about the hopeful part. But yeah, I saw something interesting on Twitter today where someone said, sort of a lot of the things that are happening now, people are comparing it to, 1930s Germany, and they were like a more apt comparison would be to compare it to Reconstruction. And I was like, whoa, I just had never really heard it laid out like that before. And I actually believe it's true. I was only able to do minimal research and really only minimal writing about Reconstruction in the book. But Reconstruction is something that isn't really, I think, is one of the things that's taught the least in school. I don't remember ever really learning about it. It's like when you talk about it, people, it feels kind of nebulous, like nobody really understands what Reconstruction was or what happened. And, I think that's by design, because it's when Black people, were freed from enslavement. And then Black men were given, the right to vote, and, started gaining political power. And that was really threatening to a lot of white Americans at the time. And you saw, a lot of what they called race riots at the time, that we call massacres now, back then, to sort of suppress that power. The KKK, they had to pass like I think 3 laws that I think I said in the book, that to suppress their power, because they had risen up and were so dangerous at the time. Yeah, gosh, I don't know. I mean, there are so many parallels, and I love that you made that parallel between Ida B. Wells and Nicole Hannah Jones, who I'm a huge fan of both of them. But yeah, I think we're just seeing a lot of things repeated. Even the 1918 influenza pandemic, the response between from President Woodrow Wilson at the time was almost identical to the one from our former president when the pandemic hit. And it was really shocking to see that, and to see how history is repeating itself, I think, mostly because history has not been taught in depth in this country, and because people are trying to do things like ban books that talk about the history in an honest way. But I think the hopeful part is that, with things like social media and just all of the technology, which can be a little damaging overall, but it is a way for people to get their voice out and to organize, like things like protests and, mutual aid, and just things to really bring communities together. I think that's a really positive aspect of now. And, social media, again, I have a really like fraught relationship with it, obviously, but I do see ideas on there that I'm like, wow, I never thought about that, or this really broke it down in an interesting way that I hadn't understood before. So I think as long as we are able to have voices like that out there telling the truth, releasing things like, although I don't think people should feel, required to watch these things of like, videos of shootings and other kind of violence, but those kind of videos, lead to prosecution in some, rare cases, but at least it gets the story out there, and it gets people talking, and sometimes it gets the law moving. So I think those are hopefully some like things that seem hopeful and not just despair.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Looking for more audience questions, and I know we're almost out of time, but I think we're out of audience questions, but I want to just ask one of our extra questions. What truths do you believe adults forget about being a teen, and how do you represent these truths in your work? It can be fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah, I mean, I think they just kind of forget that teens are humans with a lot of thoughts and ideas and hopes and dreams, just like adults. my friend Alana K. Arnold, whose work I mentioned that I really love earlier, she always says, like, children are whole people. And I think it's really easy for adults to forget that, that, they were once children and they had a lot of ideas and thoughts and spending time. I don't spend a ton of time around teenagers, but, most of my friends have kids, from like younger babies up to like, tweens kind of, and a few of them have teens. And it's always so interesting. I'm just like, wow, they're so thoughtful and they are aware of everything that's going on in the world just as we are. They just aren't able to process it the same way. Like, I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, it was like the AIDS crisis was the big thing. And I remember being really scared and not really understanding what was going on. There was a lot of misinformation back then about AIDS and HIV. And, it wasn't like because I was a kid, I didn't know what was going on. I just maybe wasn't able to process it in the same way that an adult was, or understand, the way it was being talked about necessarily, but I knew what was going on. And so I just wish that adults would kind of like take time to remember that, like Alana says, they are whole people and, they have feelings and thoughts and they just want to be heard and respected the same as adults are. And they deserve that too.
Thank you.
So I think we have to thank you so much. I think we have to start wrapping up.
So fast. So
it did.
It really flew by.
It really did. I know. I'm like, it's been an hour.
So thank you so much. And to Brandi and to everybody who joined us today. We hope that you enjoyed this conversation. The library's next Your Author program will be Friday, December 3rd at 4 p.m. You can join author Adriana Cuevas as she presents her book, Cuba in My Pocket. Adriana's work has been nominated for a Pura Belpré Award, and she is a former Spanish teacher. When she's not helping students or wrangling her pets, which include an axolotl, she practices fencing with her son and works on her next novel. That's streaming live on the library's YouTube channel and Facebook. And also, those for that program as well, those attending the virtual program will have an opportunity to win a free book. Remember, those of you who are at this program, you can also win a free book, ECDEPT at lapl.org. Enter to win it. It's a great book. Also, Winter Reading Challenge will start on December 6th. So go to lapl.org/winter for more information. And that's pretty much it. Thanks, everybody, for attending our virtual Your Author program. Thank you again, Brandy Colbert. And we look forward to seeing you all in December.